In our last episode, we looked at the early life of Dick Nunes, a man who in his later years would reshape the Disney vision for its theme parks. We looked at his early life, his experience in football, and a serious injury he absorbed out on the field, ending his career in sports. As our episode finished up, Nunes was hired by Disneyland Incorporated to assist Van France in training the 600 employees that the park would need to hire to operate it. At the time, the Disney organization was comprised essentially of three companies: Walt Disney Productions, which was a publicly held corporation, the WED design firm, which was a company privately owned by Walt Disney, and Disneyland Incorporated, which was a company owned by a few partners such as the ABC TV network, Western Publishing, Walt Disney Productions, and Walt Disney himself. Because of this arrangement, employees at Disneyland were both connected to and structurally distanced from the studio and WED. Also because of this, employees at Disneyland occupied an unusual space. They were in an organization that was reliant on the studio, but also needed to operate independently, especially in terms of finances. This would create limitations on the park as it tried to grow. But that first summer, no one was yet focused on these problems. Everyone out at Disneyland, or what was casually called the site by nearly everyone who worked there, including Dick Nunes, was focused on simply finishing the park and preparing new hires to work there. And that brings us up to today's episode. In the second half of June and the early part of July 1955, Dick Nunes continued in a role he had known for most of his life. A person trying to fit in, an individual willing to do whatever was necessary to find success. At Disneyland, he filled in as needed in other divisions and learned to do new jobs. He did everything from checking up on new hires to personally converting the training room over to a civic control center when local officers needed a base of operations from which to manage traffic during the week the park opened. Quote, "I had to change the room to make space for cots for the highway patrol unit," he said. "I helped schedule physical examinations, then ran errands for the safety engineer while following up on signs for traffic control." Nunes was well enough liked by management that when Walt decided to hold his 30th wedding anniversary at Disneyland, management selected him as one of the few employees to work this private event. The anniversary party would be held on July 14th, just 3 days before Disneyland's press preview day. Walt's daughter, Diane, recalled that Walt invited about 200 to 300 friends and colleagues, all of whom arrived in the evening at Main Street and either walked or were carried by one of the horse-drawn wagons over to the Frontierland area, where they were treated to a few rides. The rides were located in Frontierland and Adventureland. As guests soon discovered, many of the attractions elsewhere in the park were still not finished. On the morning of the party, Nunes worked in the White House training last-minute hires, but in the afternoon, he walked across the street to change his clothes. Quote, "I went to the site to don a security costume to help direct the guests," he said, "and then I changed again to act as bartender on the Mark Twain." On board the steamship, he served business executives such as Hernando Courtright, owner of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, actors such as Buddy Epson and Bob Cummings, and associates who had worked with Walt, such as architect Bill Pereira. Columnist Hedda Hopper wrote about the evening the following day. Quote, "We rode the horse-drawn streetcar through the western town to Frontierland, boarded a boat for a sail through Adventureland on a winding river with alligators rising from the water and spitting at us as we went by, and wild animals roaring at us from the jungles. Then followed a ride on a stagecoach drawn by 4 horses through a riverbed filled with water, a trip on the showboat Mark Twain, which Dinah Shore guided through perilous waters. We all sipped mint juleps served by waiters in red coats." Nunes was one of those waiters dressed in elegant red coats. The party came to a head inside of the Golden Horseshoe Saloon, where singer Judy Marsh and comedian Wally Bogue entertained guests with numbers from a Western variety show that would open 3 days later at the park. Guests left around midnight, but Nunes stayed to finish up so construction and training could begin the next morning. Quote, "Finally about 2 in the morning, Nunes explained, cleaned up the Mark Twain and made sure that the liquor was properly secured." Sunday, July 17th, was Press Preview Day for Disneyland, an event that marked the opening of the park to invited guests. It was unlike anything Nunes had previously seen. The event might have been described as something similar to a college football game between crosstown rivals in a stadium where all of the workers had just been hired on a field where the grass hadn't yet taken root. The night before, Walt himself had worked on the park, painting walls and checking key attractions until long after midnight. Then he slept in a small apartment arranged over the firehouse on Main Street. The next morning, he continued to check key attractions, making a list as to which rides would open and which would not. He watched crews finish asphalt on Main Street and others paint a few buildings in Frontierland. By noon, however, he was starting to enjoy himself. He operated the full-size locomotive around the park just like he'd once piloted that scale model railroad in his backyard. But in the early afternoon, he changed his clothes and prepared for various opening day presentations. Ticket entrance times distributed to celebrities and the press were staggered, but the first large group was scheduled to arrive at 2:30. Quote, "That was a hectic day," Nunes said. "My memory of the opening of Disneyland is seeing Main Street being paved down from the castle to the main gate, and then watching the opening of the gate and seeing a sea of women's high heels being stuck in the hot asphalt." As crowds pressed toward the entrance gates, Nunes, like others, saw that the park had made an error in the wording on each invitation. The invitations claimed that they were good for the named guest and his or her party. Quote, "So buses would stop and people would get off with one ticket," Nunes said, and then 10 or 20 additional members in their party. Other problems were less obvious, such as interested locals who snuck in by scaling the fence behind Frontierland, and a large group who, undetected, used counterfeit tickets for admission. Park managers anticipated 10,000 guests, but ended up with 30,000. The centerpiece activity of the day was a live television broadcast arranged on the ABC Paramount network to introduce the park to the world. But to manage the broadcast, Disneyland employees needed to close down areas of the park so that on TV, the environment didn't appear overly crowded. First, during the late afternoon telecast, they closed the front gates, causing deep crowds to wait in the parking lot. Next, they restricted access to presentation areas so Disneyland would appear busy but not mobbed. Finally, they limited crowds on Main Street during the parade, particularly around the cameras, but let guests gather as they wanted further along the parade route in Frontierland. Quote, "We had to shut off areas for the television crews," Nunes continued. "That created a major problem because you couldn't create the flow that you needed, and it was hot. Oh God, it was hot." Beyond the crowded walkways and the long lines for rides and food, Nunes observed other elements of the park fall apart. Quote, "We had a gas leak and we had to close Fantasyland," he said. The gas leak came from newly installed pipes laid just beneath the asphalt. Then there was the near capsizing of the steamship. Quote, "My memory of the Mark Twain," Nunes explained, "was I heard we needed some help down there, so I ran down there. Here's the Mark Twain literally almost sinking. Too many people on it. I mean, underwater." The guests needed to be unloaded from the boat to the bank, with some of them wading through a few feet of water, to arrive back at the dock completely drenched. Quote, "One attraction that ran pretty well, except for the revolving crocodiles, was the Jungle Cruise," Nunes said. The Jungle Cruise boats operated all day, though other attractions, particularly the Fantasyland dark rides and Autopia, broke down repeatedly. The atmosphere should have elicited disappointment, even anger from guests. In a few it did, but Nunes observed that many guests responded positively to the park. They were able to see the unique idea behind the themed lands, even if the park itself was packed with crowds. Quote, "The whole concept of coming down Main Street was kind of nostalgic," Nunes said. Elsewhere, he noticed how guests looked up with wonder at the storybook castle. Quote, "Fantasyland was kind of neat," he added, "and the Jungle Cruise was very special because nobody had ever done that." Even though the park was far from finished, as he moved from land to land, Nunes could see what Walt had intended, that Disneyland was a place designed to lift people up out of the real world and give them experiences in environments far from home, while a team of ride operators and food service workers did their best to ensure that guests were enjoying themselves. It was a concept that, now that it was in motion, Nunes could see into with a little more depth. On TV, Press Preview Day presented the park in its best light, but for those there in person, they saw all the problems: poorly controlled queues, crowded walkways, broken attractions, and a shortage of meals. Quote, "We still call it Black Sunday," Nunes explained. But despite the problems, guests, or at least some of them, were captivated by the park. The reviews were mixed. Some reporters noted that the park was unorganized and unfinished, but others saw a type of cinematic wonder in the park around them. From an operations standpoint, Nunes understood that Press Preview Day had been a disaster. Guests overran the park and overpowered facilities, leaving trash everywhere. The night ended with many of the rides damaged and areas left in disarray. Walt walked through the grounds with managers, supervisors, and a few key employees, including Nunes. Around them were small piles of trash, as the park hadn't had enough trash cans for the people who had attended. Though earlier, Walt had been visibly upset by the problems, at this point he approached the situation with an air of practicality, understanding that the grounds needed to be ready for paying customers who would arrive in a few hours. He gestured to the trash. "Look, we've got to keep it clean," he said. "Add more trash cans." He continued down the street. "Add more people to sweep the streets." Then he began to list off the principles around which he'd arranged his park. "If we keep it clean," he said, "it'll train the guests to keep it clean." These elements were quickly put into place. The following morning, a Monday, as the park opened to the general public, Nunes helped out in Fantasyland. The park saw just over 26,000 guests come through its entrance gates, a tremendous crowd that at 8 a.m. was arranged into a line that stretched from the ticket booths all the way out to Harbor Boulevard. Guests flocked to rides that they had seen the previous day on TV. The three busiest were these: the Disneyland Railroad, the Jungle Cruise, which at that time was called the Jungle River Ride, and the Mark Twain Riverboat. Some rides, particularly the Fantasyland dark rides, had very low ticket counts due to mechanical failure. But as the week improved, so did the reliability of these attractions. On Monday, for example, the Snow White dark ride had only 673 riders because the ride was closed for hours. On the following Sunday, after some track and prop issues were resolved, it had 4,704. Some attractions, such as the You Drive 'em Phantom boats in Tomorrowland, were a locus of problems from the start. During the park's first week, these boats were open only on Wednesday and Thursday before going down again for repairs. Other attractions, such as the Dumbo Flying Elephants, required additional work simply to open. As July warmed into August and as managers observed problems, they saw a need to more deeply understand how guests use this unique park and how Disneyland employees operate it. This would require a field study and recommendations, ideally from trained consultants. Only Disneyland Incorporated was beyond broke. To meet payroll in July, the park borrowed money from one of its retail sponsors and also from a construction manager who worked there. If the park created a study to improve operation procedures, it would need to be done by someone who already worked there. That first year, very few employees at Disneyland had a college degree, let alone any postgraduate experience. Hourly wage positions were directed at entry-level employees. Even though Nunes wasn't an engineer, an economist, or a systems analyst, because he had taken a college course in statistics, he was assigned the job of creating the operation procedures for the entire park. Procedures that would ensure quality and consistency in how guests experienced attractions. Quote, I was put in charge of setting up all the standard operating procedures because Walt wanted a consistent good show. He didn't want it run like amusement parks, where there is a pretty girl in the carousel and you run it longer, and if it's full, you run it shorter. With a stopwatch, he timed out rides with variable operations, such as the carousel, the Dumbo Flying Elephants, and the Mad Tea Party, to define standards so the experience was the same for each guest. He found the work engaging, far more so than the type of work he had assumed he'd do at an amusement park. Weeks earlier, when he was hired, Nunes had believed that his position would be, quote, a temporary job for the summer in an hourly classification. But after the park opened, not only was he given interesting assignments, he came to believe that Disneyland itself was in a unique position to find success. Along with Van France and others, he could list off the reasons. First, all those children born just after World War II were at the exact right age, along with their parents, to enjoy a park like this. Next, the expanding California highway system now made it possible for a family from San Diego, Los Angeles, or even Bakersfield to visit a park in Anaheim as a day trip. And then there was this. The country was beginning to focus more on leisure. In the 1930s and 1940s, most Americans had known hard times, first from the Depression, then from the war. But Americans were now shifting into a different space, one far more focused on relaxation and entertainment. By the end of August, Nunes knew his way around multiple divisions of this new park. Quote, I wound up training practically all of the new Disneyland cast members who started in 1955, he said. As a result, he knew people on every attraction and in every shop. Moreover, he understood how their roles contributed to an overall presentation of the park. For the previous 5 years, he'd believed that after receiving his master's degree, he would find his way back into football, this time as a coach. But during that summer, Walt had said something that changed his mind. Quote, you can design and create and build anything, but it takes good people to make it work. Nunes began to wonder if he might be one of these good people, someone who could take directions and make meaningful decisions as the park continued to grow. After considering the possibilities before him, either USC and more directed teaching gigs or continued work at Disneyland, he decided that he, quote, wanted to be one of those people who stayed with the park after the end of the summer season. He saw a place for himself on the ground floor of this unusual business, an enterprise that might or might not grow into something meaningful. Regardless, he took leave from USC and remained at the park. Down in Anaheim, he was quickly rewarded for his decision. After completing his operating procedures, he was moved into General Services, which was a back-of-the-house operation where he oversaw the steno pool, the PBX phone operators, and the mailroom. With this, he became a salaried manager, most likely the youngest one at the park. Technically, he was given a raise, though he soon discovered that without overtime, he was making slightly less than he had been as an hourly worker. But overall, he understood that his prospects at the park were on the rise. The park during its initial months was overseen by C.V. Wood, a man who had grown up in Texas and who liked drinking and good times. Despite never obtaining a college degree, Wood, or Woody to his friends, had previously led the Los Angeles branch of the Stanford Research Institute and during the war had also overseen production of the B-24 Liberator bomber for Consolidated Vultee. Wood was a project manager who hired longtime friends into managerial roles at companies where he worked, including Disneyland. At the park, these men established a freewheeling atmosphere, an environment that was, in many ways, counter to the principles publicly embraced by Walt Disney Productions and their films. After park closing on Saturdays, Woody and his friends would hold parties typically in Fantasyland to let off steam after a long week of work. Quote, "These parties would start right around midnight," one early Disneyland employee recalled. "Everybody could stay as long as they liked, and I'm pretty sure that some stayed so long they just left the party and went back to work the following morning." Another early employee recalled, quote, "It was one of the wildest places to work. I don't know if it was the morality of the times or the spirit of being involved in this brand new venture that was so much fun. But it was a nonstop party. There was something going on every day." For the most part, Nunes stayed away from that crowd. Long ago, when he played football, he had absorbed the belief that his actions on and off the field represented something larger than himself. That ideal guided him here as well. His actions, at least at work, didn't just represent him. They represented the identity of the Disney company, a set of films and TV shows that had a definite image, a moral center. From the start, Nunes positioned himself as an employee more focused on work and less on the party scene, as someone who was interested in moving ahead with the business. Marion Caracaza, who worked with him in general services, recalled that he was different than the other managers. Often, she would need to cover for C.V. Wood and his friends, explaining over the phone that they were probably out in the park, when in fact they were across the street in a restaurant or more likely a bar. But Nunes never joined Woody and his team there. Because of this, most of the hourly workers liked Nunes. He was earnest. One co-worker who explained that she, quote, liked him and believed him to be a, quote, straight arrow and a no-nonsense manager, also pointed out that even then, quote, he thought very highly of himself and he got things done. In its first season, Disneyland struggled financially. The park was weighed down by substantial construction debt. Quote, "During the summer of 1955, the fate of Disneyland was very questionable," Nunes explained. "Money was in short supply. We received complaints about attraction breakdowns, lack of drinking fountains, long lines, food, high prices, you name it." To make matters worse, throughout the fall, ticket receipts were lower than expected. Quote, "The first check I received as a salaried supervisor, the other managers said, 'Dick, don't cash it.' And I said, 'What do you mean don't cash it?' They said, 'We have to be sure we can cover the hourly checks first.'" Nunes understood. He needed to wait until more money was added to Disneyland's bank account. To this he joked, "Please transfer me back to hourly as quickly as possible." The men around him laughed. Late that fall, the park moved through a period of reorganization. Walt, who had disliked C.V. Wood and his antics from the start, instructed his brother Roy to fire him. The firing occurred in December 1955, but was not official until February 1956, leaving him 2 months to clear out his office. When Woody was fired, some of his friends left with him, but others stayed, attempting to adapt to the new social expectations that Walt had for his park. This management shakeup rippled down through the ranks, creating a few new openings. Due to his company-centered attitude, Nunes was promoted into operations. He started as an assistant manager for Frontierland, one of the largest sections of the park, then was again promoted to oversee both Frontierland and Adventureland. During the first month that his job duties included Adventureland, Walt took many rides on the Jungle Cruise, in part to check the mechanical animals. Walt boarded a boat with other guests and took a seat alongside paying customers. The problems typically involved a set of alligators, or crocs as Walt sometimes called them, arranged on an underwater turntable that was supposed to turn in a circle. Like many movement effects, this one was driven by air pressure, but it was often broken, leaving the alligators floating in the dark water like oversized bath toys. After stepping off the boat, a look of disappointment worked into his face. He asked Nunes, "Those revolving crocs, do they ever work?" Trying to make a joke out of it, Nunes said, "Never when you're here, sir." The problem, as it was a mechanical issue, should have been referred back to Wed and to a team of divers, and likely it was. But Nunes also arranged for a workaround whenever Walt was in the park to keep him happy. When Walt came through the front gates, Nunes sent a pair of workers out to the island near the alligators. Quote, "Two maintenance men hid in the bushes," Van France explained, "and manually worked the crocodiles until Walt went by." The trick worked at least for a little while, but then Walt discovered another problem. He ventured again to the Jungle Cruise, likely to check on the alligators and perhaps the hippos, which were also less than reliable. But by dumb luck, he stepped onto a boat where the operator had already turned in his notice and simply wanted to have a good time on the river during his final few days of employment. After leaving the dock, this skipper sped past the mechanical animals, around the turns under the waterfall, and then to the unload area. Walt sat there quietly, clearly upset. After he stepped off the boat, he went up to the lookout tower, where he could see the boats, at least on the front half of the ride, moving along the river. He wanted to see if there were other boats speeding past the animals. From a supervisor's desk, he made a call over to Nunes' office. Nunes could hear the irritation in his voice. Nunes left the office quickly, jacket in hand. Quote, "I ran like crazy," Nunes explained, "and ran up the stairs." There he found Walt waiting for him, arms crossed. "Sit down," he said. Nunes took a seat. "How long is this trip supposed to take, Dick?" Walt asked. Nunes knew the answer immediately. 7 minutes. Walt lowered his gaze, allowing his eyes to take on the sheen of anger. "It lasted just over 4 minutes by my watch," he said. "We shot through there so fast I couldn't tell the hippos from the elephants." He then told Nunes, "How would you feel if you went to the movies and they cut the center reel out of the picture?" Of all the managers in the park, Nunes, who had created target times for all of the variable length attractions, was the one manager whose rides should have been presented with precision. Moreover, unlike mechanical issues with the alligators, which technically were someone else's responsibility, supervision of the skippers was his job. He acknowledged the problem by nodding his head. As Walt complained about the issue, Nunes realized that he had an opportunity. He waited for Walt's anger to drain itself. Then he looked at his boss with polite confidence. "Have you got a minute?" he said. "I'd like to go around with you on a boat. You tell me how you want it, and that's how it'll be." For the next hour, Nunes rode a boat with Walt through the Hollywood jungle, lap after lap. The river at that time was largely plants and water, with only a few areas filled out with mechanical animals that moved. In 1956 and 1955, skippers not only drove the boats, but narrated the safari using plastic megaphones, as the boats didn't yet have an amplified public address system. Walt indicated where the boats should slow and how the skippers should address passengers. He wanted the narration to make the voyage more exciting, especially during those stretches without any animals. "You know, Dick," he said, "we really don't have a lot of show here. We're going to be adding show, but right now we've got to play to the show. So don't just have the boat go around in one speed. Play to the show. And slow the boat up when you've got some animation, and then when there isn't anything, speed it up. It'll be more interesting." By now, Nunes knew that, quote, Walt was fanatically committed to excellence. He was a stickler for getting every detail just right. Nunes took good notes, and once Walt left the park, he developed a plan with the Jungle Cruise foreman, Cliff Walker. Together, they went to work, drilling skippers until everyone understood Walt's plan. For Nunes, it was like football, only now he was the coach, the skippers were his players, and the drills were designed to perfect Walt's ideal trip around the river. Disneyland employees noticed this as well, that he laid the framework of football over his supervision of the park. Quote, "I think Dick remained sort of a linebacker and coach," one early Disneyland employee explained. Out on the dock, Nunes divided skippers into practice groups. Quote, "We worked in teams," Nunes said. "We had one operator drive and one spiel, and then we'd flip it and train them how to drive it and then how to spiel it and then put them together." He used a watch, and just like a coach, he timed out each play until the movements of the drill were ingrained into each person. The following weekend, Walt visited the park, but he didn't get on a boat. The next weekend, the same thing. In a way, Walt was taunting him, giving him plenty of time to see if Nunes could perfect this procedure. Quote, "We were training all the time," Nunes explained. "By that time, we'd gotten clocks on the boats, so they had key points where they should be." When Walt finally visited the Jungle Cruise, Nunes was there to meet him at the dock. Quote, "I had my best spieler in the #1 load position," and he hopped on and went around. Nunes remained on the dock, waiting for the boat to return. 7 minutes later, Walt stepped off, quietly pleased. But then he eyed another boat. Quote, "Walt's a pretty smart guy," Nunes continued. "He knew I had stacked the deck, so he got off the first boat and got on the second boat. We only had 7 boats in those days. He rowed 5 boats, got off, and went thumbs up." He smiled at Nunes and walked away from the dock to review other areas of the park. For Nunes, it was a good day. He had not only improved an attraction, he had demonstrated to Walt that he could carry out his wishes inside the park. He was able to take Walt's plan and implement it with employees. He carried this satisfaction for the rest of the day, that of reconfiguring the Jungle Cruise. It was a step forward, a meaningful one. But Nunes would soon discover that there were larger challenges in his future, challenges that would test him in new ways. I'll be back next week with a new episode that looks at Dick Nunes and Walt Disney during the early years of Disneyland as the park begins to expand. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. Without subscribers, we would simply cease to exist. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. If you enjoy these episodes, please support our efforts by becoming a monthly Bandcamp subscriber. On Bandcamp, you'll find dozens and dozens of extra episodes. But the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.